Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 15th Galen Data Medical Device Innovation Webinar. I'll be your host today. My name is Dwayne Mancini. I'm the founder of Project Medtech and the Project Medtech podcast. Today, we'll be discussing a critical piece of having a successful medical device company, and that is marketing and your digital footprint. Listeners of my podcast will know I often talk about this in the term of a valley of death, right? So a medical device company focuses a ton of time on pre-regulatory and getting that submission, and then once you get this submission, it feels like this, you know, this big weight is lifted off your shoulders, and then it's where the rubber hits the road, and you got to actually go sell this thing, and we call it the valley of death, and preparing for that early. So we have asked our three panelists here to come talk about marketing and how to prepare for this and your digital footprint, to hopefully help these startup companies and these med tech companies avoid the valley of death. Galen, first, before we get into this and introduce the panelists, we just want to do a brief introduction to Galen Data. And Galen Data is the cloud for medical device makers. The Galen Cloud provides a configurable platform for device-to-cloud connectivity that is compliant to FDA, HIPAA, CE mark standards. It's built on 40 years of collective experience developing compliance systems in the medical device industry. The company's goal is to make medical device cloud connectivity available to all at a fraction of the cost while shaving months off the development timeline. Housekeeping items for the webinar. If you go to the next slide, Paul, you'll see some logistics. And I haven't seen it go for me yet. But when we do get to the next slide, there we go. There's a place where you can submit questions. So this is one big Q&A session, right? So sometimes there's presentations. In this scenario, it's very much of a panel. Ask your questions, we'll get them answered. So I will be monitoring the questions that come in while we're talking. So if you have something that comes up, please send it along and we'll ask it to our experts. There will be a recording of this webinar that will be provided in the follow-up email. So at any point in time, if you want to go back, or if someone needs to go back and listen to it, they can always register and get a copy of it. There also are handouts on the side of your screen as well. So more information about Galen and also a white paper on connecting medical devices. So with that being said, we will get started here. And I'm going to give each of our panelists an opportunity to introduce themselves, but we have Krista Moon, James Hamilton, and Joe Hage. So in order how I see you guys, we'll start with Krista, Joe, and then James. If you just want to do a brief introduction so the audience gets a feel for who you are, that'd be awesome.
Excuse me. Hello, I'm Krista Moon, and I am the president of an agency called Ascend Business Growth, and we provide HubSpot services. So we've been using HubSpot since 2010 exclusively with all of our clients and embracing their methodology in selling and marketing. And I have 12 years of sales experience before this, and I realized that companies needed help with creating content and building relationships and nurturing, and HubSpot's philosophy aligned directly with what my sales philosophy was. So I was really excited when I found them, and I've just been working with them ever since. And so we're a small agency, but I've had clients in many different industries over the years. And one of my clients I've had past couple of years is in the med tech space. So we're starting to focus some attention more on the med tech space, but we do have a lot of industry expertise that we can bring for what other industries are doing as we continue our discussion. So thank you for having me, Dwayne, and Galen Data for sure too.
Joe?
I'm Joe Hage. I specialize in marketing strategy and communication for the medical device industry. I lead a group called the Medical Devices Group on LinkedIn with 360,000 members worldwide. And I host a conference called the 10X Medical Device Conference, which understandably has been on hiatus, but returns in May in San Diego, and I'm looking forward to that. And is it me, or does James Hamilton look like Benedict Cumberbatch with a mustache?
James, all
As
you.
long, as long as I don't behave like Sherlock, try my best.
He's a handsome guy.
Hey,
I'll go with it.
I'll take it. Hey everyone, I'm James Hamilton. I'm one of the co-founders and the strategy director at Distill Health. We are a boutique healthcare marketing agency based out of Austin, Texas. We are specifically focused on the health tech space, including devices, but also digital health services, data analytics, and SaaS. So excited to be here to dig into these topics with everyone.
Yeah. So to kick things off, I think there's with everything with medtech, and it's like with anything, right? I talk about this a lot. Raising capital is different in medtech. Selling your product is different in medtech. So marketing is also different in medtech. While there's some similarities, there's also differences. It's a regulated environment. So it's just a little bit different, right? If I sold you this pencil, I could probably make whatever claims I want and tell you whatever story I want. And medical device is just not that. So I think this is an important subject, but I think the one thing to set the stage here, and Joe will go for you for this one, and then I want James and Krista to kind of build off this. Something that I tell a lot of companies is when you're a startup and you're going through medical device development, there's a lot of tasks that you have to do. There's a lot of steps you have to go through. So marketing and marketing tends to get kicked back a little bit. It's not what I need to focus on right now. So it's kind of out of sight, out of mind. But as a leader of a company, you have to focus on it. You don't prepare for a marathon when you get to the starting line, right? And go, okay, I guess I'm going to do this, right? It takes a lot of preparation. So, Joe, I'm curious for you as a marketer, when do you like to engage with startup companies? And if you're engaging with a company early, what's introducing them? Take me for example. I get my own startup company. I come to you. I know nothing about marketing. When should we start? What are the basics I need to know? Let's start there.
So that I lead a great big group, and I hosted a conference for a couple of years. And this notion of which function comes first is, I don't know that there's an answer to it. And of course, all of them is not an answer either. But I really, I tried to put a point to it. And 2 conferences ago, I think I concluded that quality of the product in this industry has to be first, because lives are at stake. And, if you don't have the right regulatory strategy, you're never going to introduce your product, et cetera, et cetera. And yet, and perhaps this is a marketing-centric view of the world, if you don't have a benefit worth caring about, then don't bother with even making a quality product. So, I mean, in some way, and if you take the broadest definition of marketing, to identify your target market or your future customers, what do they need? And do they really need it versus what's available today? So you may say, I can make an operation 5 minutes faster. And they will say, great, yeah, because it takes an extra 5 minutes to clean up after you. And even if there were an absolute 5-minute savings, that wouldn't be one more operation per day. So we're talking around an error. Tell me again, why should I care? So, as you know, and you and I have done this before, to me, and I'll stop here, the formula to determine if you really have something is to fill out the following 5 spots. And that is, to whom? Who is your target? How do you identify it? To whom? What? What's the name of your company, product, or concept? Is the what? What is your frame of reference? The device, the gelatin, the food, the appliance. the what. I need a word that I can relate to. To whom, who is the what is the primary benefit that you offer? And supporting claims. Why should I believe that you can do that for me?
James, anything to build off that?
Yeah, I think one of the challenges we often tell teams to focus on first is to break the tunnel vision of believing that the benefit that they offer to any one specific audience is the be all end all of their product. And especially a lot of teams tend to get trapped into the belief that, because they make an outcome better, they have a product of value that's worth selling. Healthcare, never hurts to remember, it's like the only market in the world where the user is often not the buyer who is not the payer. And you have to account for all those people and your benefit, your value, and your hazards to all of them in order to really fully understand what you offer to the marketplace. So I'd say, early on in the process, it's really, really important to do that work to map out that value chain, figure out to whom you offer the most value and what that value is worth in reimbursable dollars. To build on Joe's example, and it's a great one. If you offer a surgical instrument that makes something 5 minutes faster, but it takes 5 minutes to clean up after you, it's also worth asking, like, what is that 5 minutes worth to the procedure in the beginning? Who's going to pay for that additional 5 minutes? And will it be worth it to them to even offer you coverage to get into that OR in the first place? So it's a very multi-layered structure you have to work through to even understand the viability of your product, but it's never too early to ask those questions when you're trying to figure out what's in your MVP.
Krista?
Yeah, so there's three things I would do with the company at the very beginning of their journey. And the first, so we've heard buyer personas, Joe and Jim talked about that. Absolutely, you need to know who your target audience is. And if you go online and type in like buyer persona templates, there's a million different ways that you can build out your buyer persona so you don't have to try to figure out, well, how do I do all that? Just pick a template, fill it out. It'll walk you through step by step how to think about your buyers and the value you're adding. The second we talked about already is the value propositions. And that's if you go online, type in Jill Conrath value proposition. She's excellent at teaching how to write value propositions. And I also have like a little, just like Joe has, he has got like a little formula, right? Where you can just plug it in. So there's different formulas you can use. So map out your value, your personas. And then there's one more thing I would really focus on right out of the gate is keyword research and thinking about what is your core topics and what words do you want to rank for on Google that are most relevant to what you're trying to sell and the value that you're trying to offer people. So investing, if you don't know anything about SEO, hire someone who does, and they can help you pick out your core keywords so that as you're building out your products and services and any web pages that you're creating or any presentations or content, you can focus on using the right words because it takes a long time to build up SEO authority online. So the faster that you can start putting content on your website about those topics, the better. And they don't have to be, publications or case clinical research studies or anything, just educational information about your topic and getting that out there sooner rather than later. So personas, value propositions, and SEO.
Okay, so I want to get back to digital marketing in a minute, or digital footprint. But James, to touch on something you said as well. So when you have a basic product, right? You're marketing to a customer. In medtech, like you said, it's a little more convoluted, right? There's multiple customers. There's the patient. There's maybe the healthcare system. And then there's the doctor. So how do you customize your marketing to touch on all of those? Understanding that you're probably not doing anything unless there's clear value to the patient. I get that. But then I talk to customers and they're like, well, the doctors love it, but the hospital doesn't really care about it, or the hospital chain cares about it, but now the doctors are going to get a hit from how many procedures they do a day, which means they're not making money. So, how do you balance all that in your marketing plan?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And it's something you really need to think closely about when you're thinking about mapping out the value proposition for your product. Now, I mean, I should caveat this in a big way by saying, when we say medical devices, that covers an incredibly broad range of different technologies that need to engage with, varying levels of this different complexity, right? If you're making if you're developing an OTC, TINS device, that's got one kind of value proposition. If you're developing a surgical platform to be used in the OR, it's another very different one. If you're developing a connected device with a service attached to it, that's a third very different kind of value proposition you need to build for yourself. But typically what you want to look at is both, your clinical value proposition, how does it make a difference in a patient's care, but also an operational one and a financial one. Those are the three that are usually most important to map out first. Typically, most people who are developing a medical device, they're savvy people. They know they're building something that could make a difference in somebody's care. So they typically have a relatively good idea of what that clinical value proposition is going to look like. And it's the other two where they run into trouble. You could develop a great device that patients love, and it's got a wonderful service attached to it, but it's a pain to integrate into someone's EHR or into their IT stack. So there you have a problem where you had to figure out how you message that device to the IT group, in addition to the patients, in addition to the physicians who are going to have to work it into their administrative workflow. So it's really important to kind of consider all those valences when you're figuring out what your value proposition is, because typically for most devices being launched these days, you need to have, not one, but several, each with its own individual audience.
Mm-hmm. So, go ahead, Joe. You're on mute.
What a newbie error. I'm embarrassed for myself. I want to applaud what James said. I'm emphasizing that you need all three: clinical, operational, financial. Write down that mnemonic for yourself, COF. You need all three or you will fail. I think it's that binary.
Okay. So, sorry, was someone else going to add something?
Well, I can add to that a little bit.
Yeah. Yep.
So when you you get your buyer persona template and you start filling it out, you're going to have one for each of your buyers, your doctors, your investors, your patients. So you're going to do one for each person. And then you're going to think about what, like they were saying, what's important to them. And we look at things in terms of awareness. So do they even know anything about this? So for each person, you need to decide, where are they and what do they know and what do I need to teach them to get them interested? And then for each person, you think about the consideration stage. So they know they have a problem, they're looking for a solution, and then you have, here's the solution idea. So for each person and persona you're pursuing, answer those questions. And then the decision stage, they know their problem, they know what solution they want, they're gonna go with this company or this device or this technology, and now they need to decide the best companies to work with that can provide what they're looking for. So you're gonna have different messaging and different content for each stage that your buyers are in, but like you're gonna have, for every single persona that you're targeting, you're gonna have a different persona template and content marketing plan. And they're gonna overlap, so it's not gonna be totally recreating the wheel, but you just might tweak some language for each persona to make it for them.
Awesome. Again, I'm teasing this again. We're going to get the digital marketing I want to touch on next, but you guys keep bringing up good points. So, Joe, I think, just listening to you, Krista, James, all talk here, again, we talked about when does marketing come into play? And I think what all three of you are painting is early in that development process. So I just, if you could touch on a little bit of how regulatory decisions that you make in a regulated field early on could affect your marketing plan, right? So you guys are kind of working backwards and saying, here's the product we need to make, but there's things that happen. Like for me, when I'm talking to clients, it's, well, we want to be at 510K. Okay, why do you want to be at 510K? Well, because it's an easier regulatory pathway. Again, fine, but is that affecting claims you want to make, right? Because you could really just, if you can't make certain claims you want, maybe you don't have a product anymore. Maybe it takes away from some of these value adds. So do you do a lot of early stage consulting to help work with these regulatory consultants on, hey, this is what we have to do in order for us to be successful. So as long as we can make these claims, I don't care what we are.
Well, you and I have a mutual friend in Michelle Lott.
Yep.
And you know that I've been helping her with her marketing for a number of years now. And the value proposition we put together for her, now, mind you, she does regulatory consulting and quality consulting. And so do hundreds, thousands of other people. So what was it about her that would stand out? How could we package what she does? And I haven't seen anyone else, I haven't looked that hard, I guess, but I haven't seen anyone else talk about regulatory strategy. That if you approach regulatory as an asset instead of a burden, and you think about ways to approach your value proposition through your regulatory, that can become part of your story. As it relates to, when does marketing get involved and the like, I certainly prefer to be earlier because, well, I'm going to digress. Sorry, you invited me. You knew it was going to happen. Way back in the day, you weren't even born yet. I had a job with Kraft Foods. I worked on Golden Raisin Crisp, which was the shortest lived product in the history of the company. But the point here is that when I worked at Kraft, marketing ran the show. They were in the center, and operations and sales and all of these other places reported into marketing. They were the decision makers. When I later worked at an ad agency, I was no longer in the center. I was one of the spokes and an hourly billable spoke. So the company would be like, do we really need the agency here for that? And so I would only get part of the story. It made it much more difficult to do my job. In fact, again, I'll keep it quick. One time, an account executive came to me and said, FedEx needs a postcard. And I said, what's the problem they're trying to solve? And she said, no, you don't get it. They just want a postcard. And I said, are you asking me, should it be a big postcard or a small postcard? Live stamp, indicia? Yes, I got fired. The point here is the sooner you can be involved in understanding and crafting the strategy, the sooner you can add value. Because really, at its core, you're going to use the words digital marketing later, and we're going to talk about all these things. Ultimately, we can't force anyone to do anything. What we can do is persuade. And in the medical device industry, we don't have nice to haves. We have have to haves. Value analysis committees are not like, that'd be kind of nice. No, show me the clinical, operational, and financial reasons why we must have this versus, say, renovating the cardiac rehabilitation center.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So
yeah, just going to continue to add to that. I think it's we're starting to touch on voice of customer and how your marketing and sales expert can help make sure you're taking those in as well. And that's an important aspect when you're developing your product, but you're also getting the clinical.
I'll just add the closing sentence with that thought was ultimately we're storytellers. Mm-hmm. That's what we do. And there are lots of media and tools and things you do, but understand a really compelling story and tell it well in a way that people understand and care. That's what I do for a living.
Yep.
Do you mind if I jump in for a second on that topic?
Absolutely.
So our client VivoSense, they write blog articles, okay, and you know, I do hear in the space, you know, well, what about regulations? And if I post this, I could get in trouble or whatever. So I was just going to ask James, you know, do you come across that a lot? Because like with VivoSense, we're just posting educational articles about the topic. We're not posting claims about any FDA regulations or anything like that. Do you, when you're working with your medtech companies, do you, how does regulation come into play when it comes to posting content on the website or like blog articles or webinars or anything like that?
Sure. Yeah. So, I mean, it really does depend a lot on the kind of device we're talking about and the kind of audience that they're messaging it to. You know, a blog article for SEO purposes can have very different value if you are selling a connected spirometer to parents of small children versus selling capital equipment to the hospital space. In the former case, you can take a very kind of classic consumer-centric approach to generating that SEO content, make it very educational, keyword the living daylights out of it, and let it add some value to you. But for those customers that have, you know, primarily professional or other kinds of expert audiences, you know, that's when they really tighten down the screws, and they want to make sure that anything they put out there not only is accurate, but also is going to help build their authority and their credibility. Because, you know, they're not just looking at their SEO rankings; they're asking, "How's this going to make us look in the field?" You know, because, you know, the last thing they want is a bum blog article making its way around all of their buyers, because it's like any medical device world, it's a small world. So they're going to be very, very careful about what they put out there, making sure it's all referenced and that it is adding value in some way, that it's saying something meaningful and additive about what is out there in the world right now. You know, that can be something related to their product if they have the clearance or the data to say that. It can be something about changes in new regulations, and those are coming hot and heavy right now. It can be observations about changes in specific areas of practice in a field that's relevant to them. So there's a number of different ways around that curve that they can use to put something out there that is going to not just get attention, but also help kind of build their profile as well.
Yeah.
Sounds like you reference things a lot. That's one way to make sure that you're not saying anything inappropriate, or you put a lot of references to the content that you're posting about industry topics.
Yeah, it's that's de rigueur, completely expected for anything that you're going to put out there in front of a professional healthcare audience. They were going to look for that. Yeah.
And from a regulatory, oh, sorry, James. From a regulatory perspective, I was going to say, you could find various articles on this. Michelle's talked about it on MDG Premium, but if you have a approved device or cleared device from the FDA, you do own whatever is said about your device on your specific website and your specific social media page. And if there are things that lie outside of the claims you're making, you are on the hook for those, and you do have to correct that. So there are things there. I do, Krista, I want to, oh, go ahead, James. Just something to add?
No, a 14-year-old anecdote that still applies. The question of, how does marketing and regulatory work together? They really, you know, want to read everything, and how can you be contemporary and quick and responsive? What I did 14 years ago was on my watch, we rewrote everything. There was a lot of brand consolidation and the like, but everything that we published for the products and the site went through the agile process and was reviewed by regulatory. And then taking those words and, you know, putting the noun in front of the verb or the verb in front of the noun and adding a different adjective, that's the same stuff. So I did earn a degree of trust from the company that I was responsibly repurposing that which was already approved. I didn't make a new claim. And in the case of cardiac science, where we sold automated external defibrillators, if somebody had cardiac arrest and a defibrillator was used and the person was saved, sounds like a story to me. I'm not making a claim. I'm saying what happened and why it can be argued that AEDs are important, vital equipment, and you should have one in your school, library, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
Blah.
I like it.
Thanks.
So Krista, I want to go over to you here. So we've been teasing out this digital footprint. So I want to start there. I guess that was released yesterday. You appeared on the Project Medtech podcast, right? And we talked about the basics from if you wrapped up digital footprint into, website, SEO, social media, CRM, whatever else I might be missing there. But, your digital footprint as a medtech company is fairly important, right? There's a lot of things even before COVID, but now after COVID are digital. You are going to rely on people noticing your company, not only from commercialization, but raising funds, raising different rounds of financing. That's going to be important as well. So let's start with some of those basics. You kind of talked about search engine optimization, but maybe touch on it just a little bit more. Website and social media. Let's hold off on CRM integration for now, but website, social media, SEO, how's that fit in? Then Joe, James, build off that, because I know, Joe, you have a very strong LinkedIn presence as well. So Krista, why don't you start there?
Well, from my perspective, it all comes down to the technology that you're using. So a lot of companies will get started and they'll have all these different tools. They'll have their friend down the street create their website. They'll try to themselves set up a couple social media posts. So anyways, it's all a disorganized hodgepodge of technologies and systems. And so what I suggest is to look at a tool like HubSpot. Okay, I'm biased towards HubSpot, okay, but for $50 a month, you can get into this tool now, and it's got everything you need. You can do your website on it, you can write a blog, you can post your social media schedule, you can do your SEO, it's got all your analytics, you can do ads through it, you can do everything you want through it, and you can grow into it so that instead of trying to start off with this hodgepodge mess, start off with a good, solid foundation with technology that you can grow into. I think that will save you a lot of money and a lot of time and a lot of heartache and headache down the road. So if you I'll stop there, but that would be my number one thought about getting started with a digital footprint. Start with a good technology and then have one person that's managing it for you, and that the social media profiles, everything is consistent. You're not using different images and brand elements all across the web. Make it the same on all your profiles. Think of your social profiles as mini websites. So they should align with what's on your actual website.
Joanne, I don't know the composition of your audience, their age, their geography, but if they are of a certain age and they are in America, they may remember a Saturday Night Live segment called Point Counterpoint with Jane Curtin and Dan Aykroyd. And I'm certainly not going to use Dan Aykroyd's catchphrase in this because it would be wholly inappropriate and I don't agree. But I will offer, just for kind of mix it up a little bit, that SEO is now bullshit and that HubSpot or anything like it is nice, but if you're not going to tell stories that people care about, save your money. Discuss.
And this is why we had Joe on.
Right.
So
Joe, you're wrong, Joe. Come on. HubSpot is everything and SEO. You can't have a business without it.
So,
but you're right. If you're not going to use it, you're not going to follow through, do not waste your money. Agree, 100%. If you can't tell good stories, don't get a HubSpot.
So how does this build though into, if I have a very trivial understanding of your digital footprint, but talking to you guys, I'm learning more. So James, I'll go to you with this one. So how do you make sure all these things fit into your total marketing plan, right? Like, it's my understanding that I can have a great website, but if I don't have the social media aspect, is it like a waste then? Or what about, how do I make sure that the leads I get from here, from the website, and the leads I get from social media feed into, where I'm capturing all this information? Like, how does this all come together? It has to be an important aspect, because if you're just running in different directions, it seems chaotic.
Yeah, totally. So I can tell you how we typically approach that with new device clients that we talk to all the time. And I can tell you that 9 out of 10 of them start when they call us and they get on the horn with an agency. They start from exactly the same place. The story goes like this. 2 years ago, I just went to a conference and met people, and I'd shake some hands and I'd get some leads and I'd have some conversations, and then I'd do all my follow-ups, and then business would basically just come right in the door. But I can't go to conferences now, or conferences are too expensive, or it's not safe with COVID. And what they're really trying to do is replicate the handshake business that Devices was for a very, very long time and recreate it in the digital space. And that works better or worse depending on what space of the device arena that you're getting into. What your website now needs to do oftentimes for a device audience, especially a professional audience, is recreate in the space of 5 seconds the handshake that you used to have on a conference room floor. That story that you used to tell after that handshake and over that cup of coffee or that glass of wine in the conference room now has to be told automatically on your website in as few words as possible, ideally keyword optimized. And that's typically how we approach developing that digital footprint for our clients. We're looking to create a story that demonstrates your value, that explains where you fit in, explains your watch outs, and maps out who you are to who and why as swiftly as possible in a digital space. Social is a great extension of that, and I totally agree with the idea that it's basically a little mini website. Beautiful that part of it is that LinkedIn and Twitter are indexable as well, so it can't hurt to be there too. Mm-hmm. But ultimately, what that's there to do is to establish your credibility, prove your value points as quickly as possible, and give people a reason to hit that book demo button. And that's a lot of the foundational work that those teams need to do to make sure that they're going to get the traction that they need when it's out there looking to find them. I'll sort of quasi agree with Joe on one point when it comes to SEO, simply because, from our experience, when you get into especially a lot of very specialized, professionally oriented devices, you can optimize as much as you want. If the searches are not there, if people are not looking for what you're selling, you cannot optimize for it. And that is often the case with a lot of very, very specialized healthcare professionals. They don't go to Google.
The part that you're agreeing with, I actually disagree with. Just to keep it interesting. And let me specify. What you said there about like they don't really search for that, I would argue that a long tail search is quite relevant. And for those of you who may not know, a long tail search is when you type in so many words that it's like you're down to like this many pages that actually have that combination of words on it. If you just say, when I started on my own a decade ago, I thought maybe I should go for medical marketing. And then I Googled that and it was like, get more patients in your dentist chair. And I was like, I don't want to be there. And I didn't know that medical device marketing was even big enough to justify my living. But here we are in the house. So yes, I found something a bit more. But the reason I made that outrageous claim that I did is because if we use Google as a proxy for searching, Google is the smartest human ever to grace the planet. We're talking like a deity here. And if you ask the smartest person you know, can you tell me the exact most relevant page for this particular query? Either you're it or you're not. It doesn't matter that I optimized the meta tag. They're not going to fall for that shit anymore. They did in 2007. I got my start there. But now either you're the answer or you're not the answer. So search engine marketing, sure, you want to pay to play, you want to be the top result for medical device marketing, pay me for every click. You win. But if it's, no, but seriously, forget about the people who are paying to show up. who is the best answer for that? That's not an SEO question. That's a relevance. It's an authority. It's inbound links because everyone says you've got to see James Hamilton. He's the man.
Mm-hmm.
Krista, you have comments on this as well?
Well, I don't know that I have too much extra to add. I mean, SEO is my main thing. So I think whenever I write any content, the first thing I do is look up words, and you can look up how popular they are. And I agree with James, the fact that if a term has a low searchability, like barely anyone's ever searching for it, or maybe something brand new, yeah, that's difficult. But just think, if something only has 10 searches a month, but it's exactly what you sell, you want those 10 people to come to your website. So, and it's not hard to create a page on your website for a term or a long or short term keyword. So it would be valuable in that sense. But all back to what Joe said, if you can't tell good stories, and back to the value propositions and the personas, you got to do that first, and then you can be putting out this good content that tells a story, and then optimize it, and you'll increase your online visibility too.
Okay, so I want to talk about virtual versus digital now. All right, virtual versus digital, virtual versus in person. And James, I'll start with you, move to Joe, and up to Krista, just around the horn here. When I think there's a lot of old school folks who, like you said, James, went to conferences, you shake hands, that's where you met people, that's how you cultivated leads. And I'm talking, again, the entire continuum of medtech startup, investments, all the way through commercialization. Now, COVID happened, and I think a lot of people were like scrambling to say, well, what do I do now? How do I do this? And like anything else, everything lies in the middle somewhere. And so moving forward, back to in-person conferences, how do you balance that marketing budget? Right, there's a budget for everything. So how do you balance that with continuing to build your digital footprint with attending in-person conferences? I mean, what is that conversation like now going forward?
Yeah, I think we typically start with telling them to be selective. Right now, a lot of companies in the medtech space are kind of dealing with two really important and seemingly contradictory forces. On the one hand, live events are coming back, so there's the FOMO engine is ramping up really, really fast. And even for a small company or a startup, they can feel a lot of pressure to be there, because paying, the only thing worse than paying to be there is to not be there, right? On the other hand, access is shutting down really, really fast. A lot of clinics, a lot of practices pretty much across the field are using COVID as a really, really good excuse to start, excluding industry. Access was dropping really, really fast. It went to almost zero last year, and now even in the device space, where there was, historically some very, very hands-on relationships between device reps and practitioners, they're getting shut out really, really fast. So customers are kind of asking themselves a lot of questions about, do we invest in person? Do we optimize our marketing spend for being there, having the handshake, doing the detail? Or do we pile it on into a whole virtual, digital focused marketing spend, or something in between? Frankly, right now, the answer is you kind of need to be ready for both. And what we often tell people is, go to those first couple of conferences, go see what it's like, go see where the value is, but keep a really, really close eye on what you do there, the conversations that you have there, the information that you provide that ultimately really results in some value and some good continuing conversations, because that's the tell for the content that you need to then recreate for the digital space, so that it's available virtually, so it's there for someone who's going to the hybrid version of the event, or for someone who's not going at all. Using that as a bridge between, what works in person as what can work for you online can usually be a good way to kind of be a good ruler for what you need to invest in as a balance between being in person and going digital.
Krista and Joe, anything to add to this?
Ladies first.
Yeah, I thank you. I do have something to add.
Love
So my client VivoSense, I keep saying VivoSense, but they're my example study. So they go to conferences, and so they might cost like 5,000 or 20,000, even to do like a virtual conference. And then me as their marketer in the background, I'm like, wait, I could do so much. If you gave me $20,000, I could do so much. And you're gonna go to one event. So I'm like pulling my hair out. But what I do with them to make sure that they get the value from it is I make sure that, and it's going to play right off of what James was saying. You sign up for the event. So I want to make sure that after the event, I get the list and I upload it to the CRM, and we have a plan for following up with all the people after the event. I make sure that if there's any kind of presentation by anyone at the company, it's recorded and I get the recording so that I can put it on the website and use it for marketing after the event. So there's a lot of things that you can do from the content and the interactions you have at the conference to, like James was saying, repurpose, recreate, take what you did at the conference and then translate that into the digital space. And so that's how you're going to get the biggest bang for your buck on these conferences. That's my recommendation.
I just made the rookie move. I was on mute. Awesome. So, Joe, something. Well, let's pause on that one. Let me tell you guys this, and you guys can pick it apart. Before COVID, when I was in business development for NAMSA, my process was go to these conferences, meet as many people as I can, and then use social media, digital presence to continue to warm that lead up, right? Good, bad. I'd love to hear you guys' thoughts on this, right? We'll just open it up that way.
I'll offer that as a conference producer, I have a perspective that might be different. So in May will be my 11th 10X conference, and I have refused probably at this point tens of thousands of dollars in revenue from people who wanted to come and spray my guests with their business card. And I tell them a few things. One is the people who are coming to my event are my friends. Please don't do that to my friends. I don't appreciate it. They don't appreciate it. Second is, if my friend pays $100 to come and you think because you're paying $500 to come, you get the list and you can harass them afterward, what, the $100 wasn't enough for them? You got to pay more so that you got to pick on them? I don't really believe in that model. In fact, I'd go further and tell people don't come at all unless you want to become part of the family. Because, and I can promise you this, we will talk about absolutely nothing that you can't learn online without coming. Save yourself the airfare, the this and the that. Why do you come to my event? Because you like ice cream, because you want to meet my friends, because you want to be part of a community, because you want to build credibility as someone worth listening to. So I would advise as practical as possible. Again, I don't have the benefit of knowing the composition of our audience today, but go to an event. Don't sponsor an event. Don't pay for the booth. Just because you stood behind the booth doesn't make you any more credible than I really enjoyed my lunch with Dwayne and he really knows what he's talking about. If you can, and I may be unique in this regard, because I tend to know my guests personally, I invite all of my guests to say, hey, Joe, I'm really looking to something. Who would you, oh my God, you have to talk to Dwayne, you need to talk to Michelle, and I'll go walk you over to them and introduce them. Now, I recognize mine is a smaller event. I've never had more than 200 people attend, and it's manageable. But I can tell you that the 1 year when a multi-billion-dollar company approached me and said, we should partner on a show. And I was like, okay. It was the most miserable experience for me because it was all about the dollars. And they came up to me and they said, Joe, there's a guy who sells foot pedals. And he said if he could get some time on stage that he'll sponsor, one of those big booths. And I said, no. They were pissed. But I was like, I'm not going to do that to my guests. A half hour on foot pedals? Ironically, I met the guy who did get a booth after all, and I said, they tried to force me to give you stage time. And he said, so again, it's virtual or in person. It's relationship building. And another anecdote I'll give very quickly is for a company that I counseled that was selling labeling systems. They went to shows, they did webinars, they got the list from the show, and they wrote everybody, and they called, and they said, nobody's getting back to us. And I said, I'm not surprised, because if you've made an impression as somebody who knows something about labeling systems, and you stay top of mind as a thought leader, if the labeling system question comes up, they can say, yeah, I know a guy or a gal, or, I have to call Dwayne because I know that he's like the guy. He's not just going to try to shoehorn me into his thing. He knows the industry.
Mm-hmm.
Remember I said before, we don't have nice to haves, we have to haves. So yes, I recognize that I could technically potentially have a recall if I don't have proper labeling. That hasn't happened yet, so I don't know. I know I should be thinking about labeling systems, but I have a lot to do. You know when I think about labeling systems? When my boss comes into my office and says, Joe, we have a presentation for the board in a month. They want us to look into labeling systems. I need you to do an RFP, and I need you to come back with recommendations and why. Then you can bet I'm really looking for that information. And if I am top of mind, I'll be in the consideration set at that time. But there's no amount of, hey, Dwayne, you need a labeling system?
Right.
Hey, Dwayne, you need a labeling system? Labeling system, Dwayne, do you need? Congratulations to us. We sold our 1 millionth labeling system. It just doesn't matter until it matters. So either you're relevant and a thought leader and someone I'll go to at that time, or not. It's that binary, I think.
Okay. So how do you, we have 8 minutes left. LinkedIn, right? So LinkedIn for me, as a content provider as well, has been a really effective tool to give, right? And then when the dust settles, hey, I've seen Dwayne do this, and this. Maybe I'll reach out to him and he knows someone, right? Joe, same thing for all of us. So as a med tech company though, with a product, how do you utilize that? How do you meet someone you might not need for 3 years, but keep them engaged from afar? How do you do that on LinkedIn, or how do you do that in a different platform? Maybe I just don't know. We got 7 minutes now because I'm blabbing, but let's start. Krista, Joe, James, and this should probably wrap us up here.
Well, for me, it's well, to play off a little bit what Joe said, don't email anybody unless they opt in and want your stuff, even after a conference. I believe in the philosophy of a one-to-one connection with your CRM and the people in there in your company. So one thing you can do is go after an event, or for anyone that's in your database, is go and connect with them on LinkedIn, because that way you don't have to email them, but at least you're connected in the same sphere and can network, and they can see your post as they come out. But it's all about the storytelling and putting out good stories. This is exactly why I got into HubSpot and inbound marketing, because I was selling commercial insurance and X states. We're like 8 months from the time I found out and talked to the prospect, and I wanted to build a relationship with them over the course of months to try, when I call back in 6 months, they'll remember me. But that's the value of LinkedIn, and consistently putting out high value, good content, not we have all these great products and services and all this stuff, but just educating people, letting them know the value that you're providing and interesting industry insights. And then they'll see you, and then when they're ready, you'll be connected on LinkedIn and they'll call you, hopefully.
Somebody impressive somewhere stated that people don't care about you until you show you care about them. So when I speak, I don't always have to say, here's a really impressive medical device marketing thought. Follow me for more impressive thoughts. Sometimes I just say, hey, Dwayne, how's your baby? You know, it was my birthday 2 weeks ago, and no, it's fine. You didn't get me anything.
Awesome. What day? Because mine's the 15th.
I wasn't expecting anything. October 14th. Anyhow, LinkedIn makes it very easy to hit a button that says, it's Joe Hage's birthday, say happy birthday. And I get, happy birthday. And I look and see the history of our conversation. And the last thing was in December when they said, happy anniversary. And before that, happy birthday. Before that, that's not a relationship. So what I do, and I cheat, I have a virtual assistant. I reply to every one of those happy birthdays. Every one. With a sentence or two that's familiar enough and generic enough that said, hey, thanks. And then I give them one little factoid and I say, how about you? Some of them reply, and then I reply, and then they reply. And we actually talk. Be human. Care about other people. It works.
James?
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree on keeping it personal, keeping it relatable. One of the last things you want to do on LinkedIn is lead with a hard sell, ever. All of our DMs are full of of automated outreach with a big pitch attached to it. And do any of us pay any attention to it? Probably not. So there's a real art to doing that outreach in a way that feels personal, but that is also efficient and meaningful. So that's really the balance that you have to strike if you're using it as an engagement and a sales tool. We don't typically count on a lot of what we put in feeds being that impactful for us unless there's some paid boosting going on behind it. Let's say if you really have a high value piece of content that you want to have a bigger impact, LinkedIn will expect you to pay it to the top of the feed. So we would definitely consider doing that if you have a piece that's getting some decent seed engagement and you want to expand its reach. We do that frequently. It's a good, effective way to make sure that your best content gets seen. But if you're trying to build out your network and start new conversations, a really great way is to do that, directly, be personal, reach out to people, say hi, just keep it like a conversation in a bar. The best way you can start it is just to say, you look interesting, we're in the same world, would love to connect. Tends to be the best, most relatable way to get those conversations started.
Awesome. So we got 2 minutes left. I'm going to do my sales pitch for marketing and why it should be involved in your early stage company. And if you haven't realized it by now from Krista, Joe, and James, then I'll try to do my best to summarize it. But when you're running a medtech startup company, it's just the fact of the matter is it's you're running it bare bones, right? There's gone are the days where you have a 20-person startup and you haven't even raised a seed round yet, right? So you can fractionalize a lot of these things. If marketing is not a full-time position in your company, that is okay, but you should fractionalize it. You should have that voice in there. The worst thing a med tech company can do is create a product in a funnel. You want these competing, these voices that see the world in a different manner and put them all together, right? So I encourage everyone to really give some thought to that. 1 minute left, just to remind people about Galen Data and to really thank them for putting on this webinar series. If you haven't checked it out, you should. There's plenty of old episodes you can get to. I've only been moderating it for 3 months now. This has been the most dynamic for sure in terms of having 3 marketeers on as panelists. But Joe, James, Krista, thank you all 3 of you so much for being on. check out Galen Data's website. You'll see all the webinars on there. You'll see information about them. But yeah, thanks everyone for joining, and thank our panelists for their time today.